Hi guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another episode of Back to the Basics. In today's video we're talking about this sourdough starter. I'm going to tell you everything you need to know, but I'm going to try to keep it very simple and very quick. There are loads of videos online where people make it very time consuming, very complicated, and in terms when you look at it thinking, yes, maybe I don't want to give it a go because it's very difficult, but in fact guys, it is absolutely not. You needn't to complicate anything. So in this episode, I'm going to let you know everything you need to know, but I'm going to keep it brief and simple. So you might be wondering why on earth it's actually called a sourdough starter or sourdough bread. Well, this is all due to the flavor. So our starter actually consists of flour and water, and in terms consists of the wild yeast and the lactic acid. So what happens when you mix those two together? The yeast is consuming the carbohydrates in the flour and produces the CO2, bubbles and ethanol. At the same time, the lactic acid then consumes the carbohydrates and the ethanol, producing the acid. And this is what gives us a sourdough, that sour flavor. This is literally as simple as that. One thing to say, there are loads of ways of starting your sourdough starter, and of course every family does this very differently. There are many ways people can be feeding them or keeping them, but again, as I said, I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. So without further ado guys, let's actually show you how to make a starter, and then I go through the troubleshooting and show you closer what is happening after we've been feeding the sourdough. So firstly, let me show you how to make our sourdough starter, and my method does not require any discarding, so that means there'll be no waste. So get yourself a clean jar, okay, and then get yourself a little bit of flour of your choice. So I've got the plain flour here. And now we're just going to add on a little bit of water. Has to be a filtered water because the wild yeast doesn't like, or any yeast in fact, doesn't like any nasties in your water, especially chlorine. Okay, just give it a mix. Okay, so this is what we have. Okay, mixed it in. Again, the consistency varies from household to household, but the main point is we've got some flour and water. So next thing we're going to do, okay, put some sort of a cloth on top, and then put this in a warm place. So what is going to be happening, okay? This flour will be catching the wild yeast because the wild yeast is pretty much everywhere in the air. All we need to do is to capture it there, make sure it will start its work on our sourdough. So to feed your sourdough, you have to do the same process for the first 3 days. After 3 days, you will notice that bubbles starting to appear. That means we've captured the yeast and it starts doing its work. So after about 5 to 7 days, your sourdough will be ready and will look something like that. Okay, this is Mary. Yes, some people do name their sourdough starters. So it's been going there for a little while. So after a few days, obviously I have this for a few days. You can see here we have a lot of foam, and at the same time you might notice we do have a little bit of a liquid here. So when you started to see a little bit of liquid on top, that means your sourdough starter, it's actually hungry and requires feeding. So all we got to do then to add on a little bit more flour, okay, and a teeny bit more water. Okay, give it a mix. Okay, and there we are. It is now ready. So, you know guys, when your sourdough starter is actually ready, after you fed this, it will be doubling in size after approximately 4 to 6 hours. And this is where you normally see people having those kind of things, little bands on their sourdough jars, because if you say you have your sourdough level and the top, okay, you put your ribbon to the top there, okay, and then when your sourdough is rising, you will see that this was the original line and this is somewhere it is now after being fed. Of course, you technically, after a long time doing this, you already know whether your sourdough is active or not. So after the feeding, guys, you will see I've got my original sourdough starter there. Look how bubbly that looks, okay? Look at that. This is absolutely perfect. We know our sourdough is full of good bacteria and ready to go. So now If you do leave your sourdough for a prolonged period of time, okay, it will develop that kind of liquid. And if you open it up, it will smell pretty much like alcohol or actually acetone. Okay, this is nothing to worry about, but this is a prolonged period of hungry sourdough, okay? This liquid here called hooch, which is pretty much the alcohol on the top. So if your sourdough gets to this stage, okay, you can discard this, or you can try and rescue it by actually taking the liquid away, strain the liquid, discard half of the sourdough starter, and pretty much add on one proportion of flour and water. And this way your sourdough should be as good as new. So let's now recap the main points. So to start your sourdough, use a little bit of flour, any flour you want, and a little bit of a filtered water. You feed this every day, okay, with the same proportion. After 3 days, the bubbles will appear, and about 5 to 7 days, your sourdough starter should be ready. To test for its readiness, if you do feed your sourdough starter, if after 4 to 6 hours it has doubled in size, that means it's ready. Just to point out again, the more often you feed the starter, the more active the starter will be, because the bacteria will multiply within it. So it comes to storage, okay? If you use your sourdough starter on a regular basis, then you can keep this on a counter, but you do have to keep this ideally and feed it ideally, every maybe couple of days to 3 days. If you don't use the sourdough starter that often, you can put this in the fridge and only feed this once a week. If you wanted to prolong the length of your starter because you're really not intending to be using this right away, you can actually freeze it, or alternatively, you can add on a lot of flour to make this in pretty much like a dough, and then put this in the fridge and it will sit there for ages. Another thing to point out, that all the starters do behave differently from family to family, because yeast is actually very different and very specific to your environment. And please, don't be puzzled if you see somebody showing a video after they fed the sourdough starter. It's suddenly all escaping and the bubbles are huge, because chances are this is actually all put on and done for the camera. You'll see the starter is active by having a lot of bubbles. It doesn't necessarily mean that your starter is not working just because it's not overfilling the jar. It is just not how this works. As I showed you here, I've got carbon dioxide, the bubbles are coming up, and this is what's going to be helping our dough rise. So please don't be alarmed when you see some videos, because chances are they actually fake. So next thing is a hooch or liquid on top. If you start seeing your sourdough starter having a little liquid on the top, just give it a mix up and give it another feed. If you're going to this kind of stage, guys, it is still possible to rescue this. As I said, strain this, mix it, and give it another go. There's a potential you will save this. And generally, as a sourdough starter, unfortunately, this is not as fast acting as a yeast if you were to bake in the bread. It does require a lot of patience, because it is a natural yeast. It's a natural bacteria, and it's going to take time to prove your bread. So if you are considering obviously baking your bread, you kind of need to feed your starter the day before, the night before, in fact. Let it sit overnight, so then you can start mixing it with your bread. As to comes to using your sourdough starter, okay, you literally need approximately 50 grams of a starter to make your loaf. Again, don't be alarmed if, for example, your starter is young and you want to use it up. Even if you have a teeny weeny bit of the starter left at the bottom because you used the majority, you can easily restart your starter by not washing the jar, but just adding on the flour and water to your mixture. And of course, if you want to create more of a sourdough starter, just add on more flour and add on more water. You can do this twice a day for quicker results. So there we are. Hopefully this was very simple for you to understand, and please don't be scared to give it a go. So there we are. If you have enjoyed this video, please don't forget thumbs up, maybe subscribe if you're not a subscriber, and I shall see you in the next video. Bye bye.